Nice to meet you as well.
So I guess this is the first time you actually do a podcast with Latino friends.
Yes, exactly. I was wondering if I should come on and say, hey, ¿cómo pues, parce? ¿Cómo estás? Vamos.
And so Andres, let me do a quick introduction of Mel. We actually hit the record button once we actually start saying hello.
Perfect.
You know, Andres, that most I spend 6 hours or 8 hours a day just scanning the internet. I have a bunch of very good resources, and I use those resources to leverage my investments. And Mel, you started to appear on my feed. I follow guys like Jordi Visser, Raul Paul, but then you started appearing, and I watched a couple of videos. I think it's either with Marty Bent or with Anthony Pompiliano, and so you took me through a set of deep dives, but probably the thing that I like the most is kind of like the history background that you have, how you explain everything with history and not just numbers. And it started to look like interesting. And then I just, whenever I get an alert from any of your videos, I started to watch, for example, your forecast. Man, you're probably one of the most accurate guys I've ever seen in macro. And I told Andres, we got to interview this guy because this is what I call real alpha. And then you gave us an extra surprise when you told us, well, you kind of were explaining like, we shouldn't worry, the U.S. shouldn't worry too much about Europe and China, just worry about the Southern Hemisphere, Latin America. And then you told us you were married to a Colombian. So, which is kind of like super interesting. And that's when I DM'd you and like, oh, we could do it in Spanish even if you wanted. So that's the introduction. But I let you talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty and ask you a ton of questions. I brought Andres. He sometimes co-hosts the podcast. But Andres used to be a central banker of Banco de la República in Colombia. So he's been in that position where he knows how a central bank operates, obviously not in the size of as the Fed, but has a ton of questions. And he was also super, super curious about the book that you wrote, Course. And so that intrigues us a lot. So welcome to the podcast. And very glad to have you here. So why don't we start? Why are you married to, well, tell us, where is your Colombian wife from?
She is a Paisa, and
like us.
Yeah, okay,
You're Paisas too.
Fantastic.
We're from
Calasanz.
Okay.
Medellin. Yeah, Medellin, yeah, Paisa. Medellin, went to Bethlehemita for undergrad, Universidad de Antioquia, and then came to the United States to study under a visa at the University of Nebraska. And we met in 2004 in Miami, of course, the unofficial capital of Latin America. And so, you know, as my suegro likes to say, Miami is the largest neighborhood in Medellin. So basically, you know, I have that connection, right? And to be fair, my Spanish is like conversational. Like I'm not 100% fluent, and that's why I appreciate doing this in English. You know, my like I said, my father-in-law, my suegro, he still lives in Calasanz, and when he comes and visits, he doesn't speak English, and I have to speak in Spanish, and it's very broken. I'm very good in like present tense. I pretty much know the vocabulary. I know basically every word in Spanish, but once I try to put things in different tenses, it gets mixed up. So,
and do you come often to Colombia and to Medellin? Do you visit frequently?
Yes, yeah. I mean, multiple times. I think the longest time we ever went was a few years ago. We went for almost a month.
Okay.
You know, I even got a temporary membership to like a body tech near Oviedo. I mean, you know, the Ciclavia. I mean, I know Medellin. I know Los Alumbrados. I mean, I go out there. I mean, I know Medellin. Okay,
you know your way around. Fantastic.
My wife says I have a pasaporte. Okay. So I'm unofficial Colombian when I'm there. I'm unofficial Colombian. I'm a big Atlético Nacional fan.
Yes, good.
I have all the gear. Big Colombia Selección fan. I mean, I love football. My wife has really gotten me into it. We're gonna go see them hopefully next year when they play in the World Cup here in the United States. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I love Colombia. I love Latin America, but at the same time, like, that doesn't obviously influence my finance views. But I mean, I think it's a good connection for you guys and your audience that
it is,
because you do get a different understanding of the world when you are, you know, married and in an extended family for over 20 years with Latinos, right? Then a lot of gringos like me don't have, right? So there's gringos that have lived here their whole life. They maybe done a little bit of travel. Maybe they can say adios and gracias, and it's like, okay, you know, great. But it's a little different when you've spent time. And the first business I had as an entrepreneur was an import-export business out of Guatemala, actually. So I spent some time in the late 90s, early 2000s, actually living in Central America. And that's where I mostly picked up my Spanish. So, you know, I've been around the block a little bit around the Americas, and it influences my views a little bit because I have very strong views. I'm very kind of anti Europe, Asia. Like, I don't really like those places. I don't like to go to those places. I kind of don't think they really matter. I kind of think like we could create our own little utopia here in the Americas if we just, you know, got our stuff in order. I think in some sense, U.S. policy is starting to shift a little bit that way, which is not U.S. dominance of Latin America. You know, and that's not what I'm all about. I'm not all about like the United States just running the Western Hemisphere and telling people what to do. But I'm more about like us cooperating in a mutually beneficial way because we have all the advantages. I mean, if you look at Europe, on a, you know, population per square mile, it's the most densely populated continent in the world. If you look at Asia, they are resource lacking. I mean, whether it's Japan or China, they've got to import their energy. When you look at the Americas, we are self-sufficient. We have absolutely everything we need. We have labor. We have birth rates in Latin America. We have natural resources. We have water. We have energy. We have minerals. We have land. Absolutely, yeah. Almost no population density compared to Europe. And I mean, we have it all, and we don't need them. And so let's forget about Ukraine. Let's forget about Israel. Let's forget about China.
I agree.
You know,
I agree.
And let's move on, and let's let, you know, individual countries. I understand all the history of Colombia. I've studied Bolivar. I know the history of Gran Colombia. I know a lot of this stuff. Let's let this, you know, grow and become this amazing thing. And let's forget about Europe and Asia is really one thing that I'm all about.
Oh, that's actually super fantastic. You know how they call us on the podcast? They actually tell us that it's not that we're just pro-Trump. It's just that we like a ton of his new economic policies. They call us Trumpaisas, but because we have a similar view that you actually described. Even if you think about it, when you say, I mean, the immigration, the amount of land available in Europe, the resources in Asia. When you think about it, for example, with this new reindustrialization, Mexico doesn't have enough people, so its best partner is Colombia. And Colombia is a shorter distance from Barranquilla, Cartagena, Medellin to the East Coast than the same West Coast it is to the rest of the country. So yes, we are the natural partners.
The crypto-friendly policies.
Yeah, exactly. Crypto, gold.
Yeah, that's, you know, you have to have some sort of mindset being the president of the United States and being crypto-friendly, defying and challenging, you know, that establishment that was so unfriendly and hostile to crypto. And I think that, and I don't know, Hernán, if you want to start already going into these topics, but I think that is like a good intro into the questions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing that I actually wanted to ask Mel, is let's start with the biggest event of this week, which was basically what happened yesterday. And like Mel likes to call him, what the Wizard of Oz, Jerome Powell, did. Because I think that's, even you painted it like that way, gives it an added color that makes you understand what is happening. Tell us a little bit of what happened yesterday, because it was in part of what you were forecasting. And just give us a little of color so that we can explain to our audience why
What's
you
the
actually
Wizard
call
of Oz and the
what's the
Golden Path
why
and-
you
and-
yeah.
yeah, it's an amazing metaphor.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a metaphor that goes back to, many people know the movie The Wizard of Oz, which was released in 1939, but the actual book, written by a guy from where I'm originally born, Illinois, L. Frank Baum, he wrote this at a time when U.S. monetary policy was essentially going through a great reset, just as we are now. There was a famous politician named William Jennings Bryan in the United States. He had he was the Democratic nominee for president. He had a famous speech called the Cross of Gold speech. And it was about, don't nail us to this cross of gold, which is basically, don't limit our economy by saying everything has to be based on gold. And what he wanted was not pure fiat. He wanted to allow silver to be money, which had historically been money in the United States. So from the very beginning, both silver and gold were money. In fact, in the Constitution, it tells you how much gold and how much silver equals $1. And that eventually got changed. But there was what they called the free silver movement. And silver, because there were a lot of large mines in Latin America, there were a lot of large mines in Nevada, in the United States, that were producing silver. Essentially, we had this QE, right? We had silver QE. And the big bankers in London did not want this because they didn't have access to these large silver deposits. And they had large stockpiles of gold. So they wanted to kind of, the London bankers wanted to tamp down this expansion of the money supply. And Baum, when he wrote The Wizard of Oz, he basically had this yellow brick road, which is kind of a gold standard, which led to the Emerald City, which emerald green, kind of representative of the US dollar. And in the book, Dorothy wore silver slippers. In the movie, she wears ruby slippers because the directors said, we've got a color movie. This was one of the first color movies ever. We can't have silver. It's like black and white. Let's have ruby. But Baum used silver slippers for a very good reason. Silver was, this expansionist thing that was going to set free the economy. Yep. And if you listen to The Wizard of Oz, at the end of the day, the way Dorothy gets home is by clicking together her silver slippers. And Baum, in a sense, made the wizard a bit like the central bank chieftains, which are a bit like the high priests of modern society, where they come out and they pontificate and they talk and they can dispense prosperity or pull it back. And this is very
like with moral superiority, right?
With moral superiority, yeah.
Like the Pontifex Maximus.
Yes, Pontifex Maximus, exactly, which was a role that I think Caesar took on along with his political role. Yeah. Caesar was, and these are parallels to the United States, where you had the political power wanting to coincide with the spiritual power. And in today's world, it's the political power wanting to coincide with the monetary power, which is in the modern world, the spiritual power.
Exactly.
Yeah, show your silver bars, the ones that you actually have there, because you always carry them on your desk.
I always carry them on my desk. They hold up my microphone. This is a 100-ounce bar. I have other silver all around. I mean, I like sometimes fancy silver stuff. I have this is like a 10-ounce kookaburra. I have different ones, gold, silver, platinum. Before Bitcoin ever existed, I understood that fiat debasement was the way the world is heading. And,
Mel, do you see any parallel between those historical episodes we just mentioned and a debate which I love between Jefferson and Hamilton?
Yeah.
Do you see there's like a beautiful parallel between Jefferson, sound money, Hamilton, no, let's go for fiat money. I think it's amazing too. And I think it repeats in cycles over history. And I often speak with Hernan and I say, I think that that anyone in finance that understands history, as Hernan mentioned, you do in the intro, I think has like the capacity to see things in a
bigger
different
advantage.
way.
Yeah. I think there is, if there's anything that I think I have as a trader investor, I would call it like historical alpha. It's just understanding that just because things have not happened in your lifetime doesn't mean they don't happen often and consecutively over history. And so I can get into something I call American beast mode in a second, but to come back to Hamilton and Jefferson. And I think you mentioned Jefferson, but I think when you want to contrast Hamilton to someone in early
Madison?
American history, it's Albert Gallatin.
Okay.
And Gallatin
he's Minister of Finance, right?
Yeah, the Treasury Secretary under Jefferson, who is the longest serving Treasury Secretary ever. And to this day, if you go to the United States Treasury, there's kind of two sides to it. And on one side, there's a huge statue of Hamilton. And everybody knows who Hamilton is because of the play, and he's on the $10 bill. And on the other side, there's a huge statue of Albert Gallatin, who's also an immigrant, but not from the Caribbean, from Switzerland. And he was more of like I would call like a fiscal conservative. And he was someone who he was in favor of a central bank, which was central banks were huge debates in the beginning of our country here in the United States. After 1836, when Andrew Jackson, who's the first populist president in the United States, a lot like Trump has a big picture of Jackson in the Oval Office he put up. He got rid of it, and basically we had a gold standard, more or less. When the United States needed money, as we did during the Civil War, we basically just printed it. Lincoln did something called the Legal Tender Acts. He created what colloquially became known as the greenbacks, which are essentially non-interest bearing dollars.
Bonds. Yeah.
No, not bonds, just dollars, just Congress creating dollars. No bonds, printing. No interest. Printing,
the printer.
Pure printing. And I think we could be heading to that, which is if you want to solve the debt crisis, just print dollars. Congress has the constitutional authority to print dollars. We don't need to use the Federal Reserve as an intermediary and then pay interest, which essentially what we do is we say we want more money in Congress, and what we do is we say we have to go to the bond market, but we don't. We can just create the dollars.
Double click on that, because that's actually a very important subject. That I can say that about 97% of the people that I know are not aware of that.
Yeah, and we've done it before. We've done it and I think this is what I'm talking about with, like, I think America is, and I think this is going to continue whether a Democrat wins in 2028 or not. I think the United States is on a quasi-war footing. I think in a pre-nuclear world, there already would have been a hot war. But because we're in a nuclear world, there's not a hot war. And so there's a line in Quaz. We're not in a Cold War, we're in a Gold War. And basically, I think what the United States is doing is it's operating on a war footing because of the external threats, particularly from China. I think Russia, they have a huge nuclear arsenal, but they're less than like 200 million people. Like they're not really like what John Mearsheimer would call a pure competitor. There has emerged post Cold War one peer competitor to the United States, and that's China.
And so Russia's GDP is just too small.
It's just too small. The population's too small. I mean, they can cause havoc in Eastern Europe, but if they seriously wanted to make like a move into Western Europe,
they can't afford it.
they'd lose.
Yeah.
They'd lose. I
Yeah.
mean, once Western Europe said, "Okay, you're going to really threaten Germany," okay, now
No.
we're mobilizing. We've got hundreds and hundreds of millions of people in Western Europe. We've got tons of money. We've got nuclear weapons. France, England has nuclear weapons. The U.S. has tons of nuclear weapons in Netherlands. I mean, Russia's not going into Germany. Okay, so basically, the one peer competitor is kind of China, and so if you want to fight against that, and you don't want it to get hot, because then number one, a nuclear war isn't what you want, and number two, there have been a lot of other great commentators like Luke Groman, who make this great point that the United States military is essentially dependent upon China for its raw materials, its rare earths. So we don't have that as an option. We don't have either a conventional or a nuclear war as an option. It's got to be economic. And when the United States gets into this economic war mode, which it has done on multiple times throughout history, it essentially does whatever is necessary. And you can go back to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the New Deal. He also basically commanded the Federal Reserve to cap interest rates at 2.5% on the 10-year, 3/8 on the short.
And the executive branch in the U.S. just like issue an order and say, you know what, bring down interest rates to 2%, or because Trump yesterday said that he wanted a 100 basis points reduction, 200 basis points. Can he actually do that constitutionally?
I think so, but I do not think that politically that's feasible unless you're in like a World War II situation. Like,
okay,
when Americans are dying, yes, he can do that, and the people will be like, okay, like the executive branch. We're not there yet. So, but constitutionally, and this is something that somebody, there's a guy in the U.S. called Steve Bannon who used to be very influential, but he talks about potential, like there are people within the Trump administration that have a very strong reading of what we would call Article 2 of the Constitution, which is the executive branch. And essentially, their reading of it is if the situations are dire enough, the president is essentially a dictator. That at the end of the day, if it gets to a point where the United States is fighting for survival, and we had that in World War II, we had that in the Civil War, that essentially the president has dictatorial powers, and we saw that executed. We saw FDR, like you said, just tell the Federal Reserve what to do, and they did it. Lincoln did the same thing. There are famous examples where even when things went to the Supreme Court and made rulings, Lincoln supposedly said, or no, this is actually Andrew Jackson. Well, the Supreme Court has ruled, but let's see if they can enforce it.
Yeah.
And it's like the executive
That's a famous
branch,
quote,
the executive branch enforces laws. So the Supreme Court can make a ruling, but then it's turned over to the executive branch to enforce it. And if the president in the Constitution is literally named as the executive branch, which is very different. The Supreme Court is 9 people. The legislative branch is 435 congresspeople plus 100 senators. But the executive branch is named as one person. It's not named as like a conglomeration of different agents. It's named as the president is the executive, and the executive is responsible for enforcement. So if the Supreme Court makes a ruling and the executive says, yes, the Supreme Court ruled this way, but me as the executive, I decide I just don't want to enforce it. What can the Supreme Court do? The Supreme Court doesn't have an army. The Supreme Court can't control the National Guard. And so the United States goes into what I call like this beast mode. I think we did it during the Revolution. I think Andrew Jackson did it. I think Abraham Lincoln did it. Ulysses S. Grant, who was the president not directly after Lincoln, because Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson became president, and then but what happened is after the Civil War, most of the southern states basically said, okay, we surrender, but then they fought the federal government on letting Black people vote and everything. And this was a time we call Reconstruction in the United States. And Ulysses S. Grant multiple times just declared martial law, sent troops into like New Orleans and said, you know, you're going to do, this is in the 1870s. So it's not during a time of war. We had FDR do it during the Depression. He just revalued gold. He defaulted on U.S. debt because U.S. debt used to be issued with guarantees for payment in gold at a certain amount. And so the U.S. has defaulted on debt.
He uncoupled the gold.
He didn't completely uncouple it, but what he did was gold was $20 an ounce. There were bonds that had been issued with gold at $20 an ounce. There were bonds that had been promised to be repaid in gold. And he just unilaterally said, no, gold is 35. That's a 75%.
Like a haircut. Yeah,
a huge haircut. It'd be like saying to people that are owed $1,000, we're going to pay you the equivalent of, in real terms,
250.
Yeah. I mean, this is what has happened before. So this is my historical alpha.
And do you think we are like in beast mode now?
Yeah, I was going to ask, is Trump averting beast mode? Or?
We're in semi-beast mode where he's basically saying, and you saw it this morning with this Intel stuff, where, okay, he takes a 10% stake in Intel, then he meets with Jensen, then he says, Jensen, put $5 million, because we cannot depend on computer chips from Taiwan. We need a foundry business in the United States. It's not economical. It's never going to happen in a free market capitalist way.
Nope.
But we need to be able to make our own chips, because if we don't, in 10 years, China is going to say to us,
it's going to be the bitter lesson. I mean, whoever owns a computer, that's where you see Elon building Colossus at a warp speed. You're totally right. So he's in beast mode, but for compute and electrons, right?
Yeah. Compute, electrons, all this stuff. And I would call it semi, because he hasn't crossed that full line, which Lincoln crossed, Grant crossed, Jackson crossed. I could name even more presidents that have crossed this line. FDR. He hasn't crossed it yet, but he's getting close.
And do you think that? So I was very curious on your how you see that tariff issue, because we were talking with Hernan, and I'm convinced that inflation is a monetary problem, and many people think that tariffs are inflationary, and I know you don't, because tariffs are a once and for all. They create a once and for all effect, and I've insisted that
they're taxed. They take money away from the private sector.
And at the end of the day, the effect that transmits into consumer prices depends on the price elasticity of demand, because some part of the effect is absorbed by the producer, by the seller. Not everything goes to the consumer, and it's only a once and for all effect. And so let's say the Supreme Court rules against the tariffs, because that's what everybody's waiting for. Can that unleash the beast mode? Like, because tariffs, I think are like a big thing in Trump's mindset in this geopolitical beast mode or semi-beast mode status, especially against China, leveling the playing field in trade and what the Chinese do in IP and so on and so forth. So let's go, and as man said, double click on the tariff thing, Supreme Court, beast mode, inflation, all that stuff.
Yeah, I talk a lot sometimes about tariffs or interest rates, but I actually don't think those are what really drive it. You guys mentioned Jordi Visser earlier, and I think, he makes excellent points about like what's going on with AI, what's going on
exactly
in the real economy is really what's driving it. And And so like with tariffs, like what I'd like to talk about is that the United States is not really that big of an import economy, to be honest with you. Like we, even if we had, let's say, $300 billion in tariffs levied, which is what relative predictions are right now, in a $30 trillion economy,
That's
it's 1%.
1%.
And then if you say that, okay, let's say of that, 1/3 will be eaten by the consumer, 1/3 will be eaten by corporations, and then 1/3 is the wholesalers overseas. So then the net effect to the United States is $200 billion tax increase. Like we had a $365 billion deficit last month. I mean, you're talking about a $200 billion tax increase in a $30 trillion economy. With all this other stuff going on, the AI capex, eclipses that. And so I think most financial media is just literally suffering from some form of Trump derangement syndrome, and they want to focus on
they're just illiterate, because you just described them out so easy. What's the fuss? Why do they make so much noise or something that is, from the numbers perspective,
relatively inconsequential?
Yeah.
I mean, not that it's not going to not have any effect, not that it can't create like a jump on certain lines in the CPI,
but
or the
that's
PPI.
Not inflation.
But it's not inflation.
That's like a minimum relative price shock in some industries.
One-time thing.
That's it. Yeah.
Andres, I told you that you were going to love this type of conversation, because we started asking for the Wizard of Oz yesterday, and we ended up with geopolitics and history. But what was your take yesterday from Powell? Because I heard the guy, and it is so funny, because I think the market expected 50 basis cuts, but we only got 25, so it dumped. But then when he was starting to being asked the questions by the reporter, he mentioned something that it was odd for the Fed. It's like, we're going to do risk management, and like we're going to do risk management. Does that make sense for the Fed chair to actually be doing that and saying that?
Yeah, well, like I said, I do think overall there are bigger forces at play right now, whether it's the semi-beast mode, AI, and that tariffs and the Fed are kind of sideshows. But yet they're interesting and not to be dismissed. They have some effects. Whether the interest rate is 3.5% at the end of 2026 or 2.75, I mean, I don't know if that's what's going to determine what the global economy does. I think there are bigger forces at play. But I do think that the government in the United States, meaning the administration, definitely wants lower interest rates. And I think that even if the Federal Reserve doesn't cooperate, there are tools in the toolbox, treasury buybacks, things with stable coins, different things to kind of
the Genius Act.
And people have talked about this, Visser has, other people, that Trump's going to eventually declare a housing emergency and do something to I've talked about something for months. I think he might come out with something like a MAGA mortgage, where he's like, we're going to take tariff revenue and we're going to use it to buy down mortgage rates for first-time home buyers. I mean, anything can happen, because he really wants to stimulate housing. Now, coming back to the Fed, what did I think about the Fed? I think that Powell, I used to have kind of a favorable view of Powell. I don't really anymore. I think
what changed? What made you change your opinion on that?
I think he's a little bit like an Ahab from Moby Dick and his white whales inflation, and he keeps like going after it, and he's not seeing what I say the team is doing, right? In the Team America, like we're trying to stoke industrial production and boom, because we need to, from like a national security perspective. And like he's trying to like hold that back because he's worried about inflation. And it's like
playing politics. Like, don't you think he played politics last year? Because we think he did.
Doing a 50 basis cut versus 25 right now.
Yeah, I think he did. I think why he did that was because he likes to be a consensus builder, and I think the voices on the FOMC were generally left leaning, and so he got sucked into that. I actually don't think he's necessary. I mean, he was appointed by Trump. He's historically,
Yeah.
I think the thing with him is that he's now got, and people have talked about how he had this Volcker book on his desk, and I think he's missing the forest for the trees, which is, do you want 2% inflation, or do you want the United States to be impotent should a conventional war occur in the next 5 or 10 years? And I think the administration is saying, from a national security perspective and all these other things, we need to achieve certain goals. And if inflation, core PCE, goes to 3.4%, so be it. And I think he's saying, no, I'm going to die on this hill of trying to keep it. But I think his influence is waning. And his term as chair obviously ends in May, but his term as governor doesn't end for a while. And I think ultimately, like, he's got to retire. There's one Fed chair who did not retire when his chairmanship ended, even though his governor term continued. That was Eccles, which is the name of the Federal Reserve building, the headquarters building of the Federal Reserve. So I think he might be able to hold out. He was asked about this. Will he retire when will he give up his governor's seat when his term as chair ends? And he won't answer it. I think if he doesn't, that Trump's going to move to remove him. And I think that actually Powell opened the door for it yesterday. Because this is something I've talked about for a number of months, which is the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 explicitly gives the Federal Open Market Committee a triple mandate of full employment, price stability, and moderate long-term interest rates. Historically, the Fed has talked about a dual mandate, but they're by law, statutory law, not like Fed bylaws or tradition, by actual United States laws passed by Congress, signed into law. The Federal Reserve has a commitment to maintain moderate long-term interest rates. He was asked about it in the press conference yesterday, and he almost dismissed it, almost saying, well, we focus on price stability and full unemployment, and then that will take care of moderate interest rates, and that's not really something we think about. That comes dangerously close to dereliction of duty. That comes dangerously close to ignoring statutory mandate. Yeah, and then that comes into cause. And so you can imagine a situation where President Trump says, Powell has made statements that he's not paying attention to moderate long-term rates as a legitimate mandate for the Fed. That's statutory law. That's dereliction of duty. That's cause. You're fired. And if he does that, it could go to the Supreme Court, and then we have to see what the Supreme Court says. But that also, even if the Supreme Court doesn't agree, it just creates such a clown show of the Fed that the Fed essentially becomes a joke. And I think I've said this before. I think this is one of the reasons why Mohamed El-Erian, a famous analyst, a few weeks or a couple months ago, said maybe the best thing Powell could do is just resign, because the more he fights against this, the more it's going to lead to Trump just asserting authority. And he's got more authority than people want to admit. Like, he is the executive. He is granted by Congress the ability to remove governors for cause, but for cause is not defined in the law. And so then you're getting to a point where it's like up to the Supreme Court. What's cause? If Trump says, look, Powell refuses to admit moderate long-term rates are a legitimate concern for the FOMC, that's written into law. We need someone who's concerned about those. I'm appointing Stephen Myron chair. So these things are all possible. And people that think, oh, it's not possible, like I said, I think they just don't understand history. They don't know what has transpired between the executive branch and central banks of the United States in the past.
Wow. So, Mel, one of the things that bit me in the butt was end of 2021, when we had a flush of capital, technology was going up, Bitcoin was going up, and there were two signals that I did not understood, but now I pay attention and I need to read them. Whenever Bezos or Musk start dumping stocks, it's because there's something in the whole apparatus. So today, I actually pay a ton of attention whenever the Fed talks, Jerome, but it's always like tea leaf reading. So I'm between trying to read Besant and Jerome, but I tend to understand more what Besant says in the dynamic of money flow, so that I know which positions do I keep. Because to me, it's super awkward that we have a Fed, then they have like 800, 900 PhDs, and they're always late, and their forecasts are bad. And then I listen to you, and you're like right on point. And so to me, it's just that, so that our audience is, what are the things, who are the individuals, and why is it that you get it better most of the times than 900, 800 PhDs on the Fed? I think you agree too, Andres.
I agree, and I'm a PhD, and I used to work in a central bank, so I know how it works and how it operates. But it's everything about the alpha and first principle thinking, right? It's what you've always said, man.
Well, I mean, PhDs are great, and I have no offense against PhDs. I'm not economically uneducated. I have an MBA from Duke University, which is widely regarded as one of the best universities in the United States. It could almost be considered like a Harvard of the South. So I do have an advanced degree from a premier economic institution. I also have graduated undergraduate in '98. So I am closing in on 30 years real world experience. I've worked for large asset managers, firms like Russell Investments, which manage, $300-400 billion. I mean, it's not trillions like BlackRock, but it's not chump change. I've worked for different fintech startups. I've been the CEO of 3 different SEC registered broker dealers. So if there's a 29-year-old PhD at the Fed, I wouldn't expect him to know more than me. I mean that would be pretty surprising if he did, wouldn't it? I mean, oh, well, you spent 4 years getting a PhD, and now you've been writing papers for 2 years, and you know more than this guy who's 50 years old with 25 plus years in the markets and an MBA from Duke.
That's right.
So those guys should be wrong, right? I should be right. I think it just makes sense. But I think if the Fed has some sort of a consensus where they're like listening to 29-year-old PhDs, then that's an institutional problem. And I think that's a little bit what Besant was getting at in that piece about gain of function of the Fed. Exactly. And they hire all these young PhDs who have never actually worked in markets, and they're listening to them, and 90% of them are like left-leaning biased. I mean, if that's who's doing it, like, you should expect, incorrect outcomes.
What's my theory about that? My theory, because I know many of them here in Colombia. Some of them my roommate in Colombia, he got a PhD in Columbia, and he's in the Fed. But my theory, and he's not a left-wing thinking guy, but my theory is that they don't have skin in the game. When you work in the central bank, you're fed with seigniorage, with inflation tax. So it's very comfortable. So it's very comfortable to pontificate, to have that moral superiority, because you don't have skin in the game. You are the first one that captures the value of inflation tax, because they pay your wage with inflation tax, with seigniorage. So that's my theory. When you don't have skin, in contrast to when you've been in the market, when you have invested, when those guys have their investments in 401ks, and they don't, they don't have skin in the game.
They were in diapers when I was dealing with the .com boom. So
exactly.
Exactly. Why are we supposed to listen to them? It's like some of the people they put on like CNBC, and a lot of times they're like pretty faces or whatever, and it's like, I listen to these people. You seriously want me to listen to this person as like understanding what's going on? Like, no, I mean, there's a lot of this that goes on. And look, I've been on a little bit of a hot streak with things. I could totally get things wrong. Things can come out of left field. But I do think that a lot of these people, and this is going to, not to be dismissive of their credentials or their age, but it's also their philosophy, which is, I think they do have a fundamentally flawed kind of this neoclassical economic philosophy that they get indoctrinated with in these PhD programs is actually incorrect. And believe it or not, I really
which is
that they don't understand the way monetary flows and things work in a post-gold standard world. That they're still operating from
Mel, the advantages of being 50. We're all in the 50 age range.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not quite yet. In November I turned 50. I'm I guess a few weeks away from hitting that milestone.
A year and 2 years older than you then.
Yeah. I was born November '75. So we're good children of the mid '70s, I guess you could say.
Yeah. We are.
And as is my wife, and so she grew up in Medellin, during the same time you guys did, which was obviously crazy times. But I digress. So basically, look, this is not where their headspace is like, okay, I'm going to take it all the way back to the basics. What is a neutral rate? Ideally, a neutral rate is essentially, if you could think about the GDP of an entire country, and let's say you could invest in it. Let's say you say that the economy is going to grow at, say, 3.25%. That should be your neutral rate. Why is it neutral? Because it's essentially a rate where somebody who holds gold says, I think gold's going to go up 3.25% because that's essentially a play on the entire economy. And if you provide me with an interest rate above 3.25%, then I'm going to want to sell my gold to invest in that, in things. And so it's all based on this tie-in to where's GDP going to go? What's that neutral rate? What's the return I need to get to let go of my gold to invest in the economy? And if that's your thinking and you're still operating from that in a post-1971 world, a pure fiat world, I think you're mistaken. People like Warren Mosler, who are MMTers, and they're very left-wing and they're very, opposed policy-wise to a lot of my thinking. But they have what I think is a better framework for kind of understanding how monetary transmission mechanisms work, which is basically like, if you raise interest rates like you're doing now, what are you doing? We're paying $1 trillion stimulus package into the U.S. economy. 75% of that goes to the U.S. economy, which is the percentage of debt holders that are U.S. domiciled. These are mutual funds, insurance companies, baby boomers, people that hold mutual fund bond funds. So they're getting $750 billion. And then you're paying $250 billion to China and Japan and the UK.
And that actually is a very important point, because most people think that they're all international holders. No, it's in the stimulus package for the US. That's actually super important to focus on.
Yeah, people talk about like, oh, if China decided to sell their bonds, that would just, China holds like 800 billion. The Federal Reserve has rolled off 2 trillion in the last two, like the amount of debt that China holds is not some sort of a trump card. It's kind of peanuts. Like if they were like, we're going to go into the market and just sell it all today, that would create a crisis. Federal Reserve would step in and say, okay, we're just adding 800 billion, which still is going to keep us below our post-COVID peak by over $1 trillion. Like we could absorb all of China's US Treasury holdings pretty easily. And they're not going to do that because they don't want to crash it, because they've got it. They're just not adding to it anymore. They're adding gold. They're they're doing this. They're keeping some amount of treasuries because they need dollars for international transactions. But like the dollar as like a reserve currency, a lot of people think this is really important that central banks around the world hold these huge amounts of dollars. I think the U.S. has got a game plan to like pile things in stable coins, banks, different things. Like they're not dependent on China buying treasury. They're not relying on that. And if they were, they would have never frozen Russian assets after Ukraine. So I think we're just moving to a whole different thing. And the Fed with these interest rates, to bring it all the way back to the Fed with this thing of why these economists, I think, get it wrong, is they're thinking that if they lower rates, that's just going to immediately skyrocket inflation. It might cause some financial inflation, which I do think can happen from lower rates, but it's not going to affect things like how much Meta spends on CapEx. It's not going to affect, a baby boomer who buys a house in cash. Like there's a lot of things happening in the economy that just aren't affected by interest rates. And so you've got this very blunt instrument in interest rates. If you just hammer them higher and you destroy the job market, and yet Meta keeps spending what they're going to spend on CapEx, baby boomers keep spending on their ski trips and buying houses in all cash and giving their sons and daughters $200,000 to put 50% down on a home. If all that stuff keeps happening, even though interest rates are here, who do you actually hurt? You start to actually hurt Main Street. And so there's a regressive policy to higher rates, and that lowering rates is, I think, actually good for Main Street in this situation. And there might be inflation, but like I said earlier, I think inflation is like the lesser of many evils that we're facing right now.
Fascinating. Mel, one of the things that I was asking you before, that which is more important, Jerome Powell or Bessent, but one of the things that I believe why Bessent is so important is because he's just increasing the TAM for treasuries, and he's doing it right now via stable coins. Are you of the same opinion, or what do you think of Bessent stable coins and his sole main function?
Yeah. Okay. So one final, this last thing to add on that last point, which is if you look at what the Federal Reserve is doing, I do think that primarily if they maintain like this higher rate, staunchness, it does on the margins hurt the job market, and then it does on the margins hurt the average person, and that the key to this not happening is actually closing the border. Because the reason we had high inflation under Biden, but wages did not keep up, is because the labor force expanded exponentially. If you keep the labor force constrained, inflation may occur 3.5%, but real wages will keep up with it. Yeah. Real wages will keep up with it. And so we might end up in a situation where we have 3.5% inflation, but real wage increases because the border closes 4%. And so you're getting 0.5% of real wage gains. Where under Biden, we might have had, let's say near the end, we might have had at the end of his term 3% inflation, but we had 2.5% nominal wage gain. So we had 0.5% negative real wage gains because the border was open, flooding the labor market. So this is all part and parcel of it, is that if you are willing to run the economy hot and let inflation go high, the way you keep the middle class whole is you tamp down the labor market so that wages keep up with it. And I think that's what we're seeing happening. Now, to the stablecoin point about Bessent, I think, crypto does play a huge part in this. And I think I mentioned this on a podcast with Pampa a couple weeks ago, is that I think crypto and Bitcoin is being seen as a inflationary output of where can you take this financial asset inflation that's going to come from maintaining rates lower for longer without it affecting the real economy. Because if it goes into the S&P 500, that's kind of okay. But at a certain point, valuations get out of control.
Yeah, the other just blows up.
The other main outlet for for this in the past has been housing. And when it goes into housing, you really hurt people, because that's obviously people's biggest expense. It's their biggest purchase of their lives, is to buy their house. So you need to find somewhere for this financial inflation to go. And if you put it into something like gold or Bitcoin, these are not real, like people that own gold and Bitcoin make money, but nobody needs to go out and buy gold and Bitcoin to feed their family. And so if gold goes to 10,000 or Bitcoin goes to 1 million in the next 5 to 10 years, nobody really gets hurt. People get rich. But if houses go to $1 million for a house that used to cost 200,000, somebody gets hurt. And so you want to deflect away this financial asset inflation from useful assets like copper, housing, and you want to deflect it into crypto and Bitcoin and gold. And I think that's part of what their plan is. And I think that's why you're seeing things like Solana hitting close to 250 as we speak, probably going to go to 300 by the end of the year. You've got all these things that are out there that are going to be shock absorbers for the wealth that's going to be created by these abnormally low rates. And so this is a bunch of like jigsaw puzzle stuff.
What you just said on Solana is like a melody for Hernan. It's like
Hernan, you love Solana?
Well, like I've been to. Look, I'm a nerd by heart, and when I bought my first Bitcoin 2013 at $100 because I used to live in San Francisco for 12, 15 years, and two guys were chatting like, oh, I work at Coinbase and there's this thing and it runs on SHA-256, and like I got interested. And then I've never liked Ethereum, but from Ethereum I jumped into Solana because this whole deal about composability, which allows basically for internet capital markets for everything to settle on a layer that is just fast and affordable, made a ton of sense. So I invested a load of money on that. So I'm very bullish. And probably one of the things that I'm most proud is that my friend here, I don't know, a year ago, he was telling me, no, Bitcoin is a Ponzi. Now he's the biggest convert.
2 years ago.
2 years ago, and he just like, and then if you're not buying Bitcoin, you don't understand monetary policy, economics, hurdle rate, inflation, debasement. So he's one of the best converts you could ever meet. So everything that you're saying is just like music to my ears. And I think one of the biggest responsibilities, Mel, that we have is that you, by citing so much history and having so much historic background, explaining what's wrong with the education, coloring or giving your own adjectives or perspective of like guys like Jerome and Bess really help and educate a ton of people that were not aware. I mean, you cannot imagine the amount of people that I graduated from university that are just totally clueless about how the real pipework of the world works. So I really appreciate you spending the time explaining these things in such an easy, digestible manner. One last or two questions. Do you think that the world is really starting to settle transactions, for example, in gold? We've seen this huge spike, and you think like China is buying oil from Russia or India, and they just send a plane, or the spike on gold doesn't mean that they're changing the settlement coin, or let's call it gold or metal, or I don't know, even crypto. The standard. What is really happening is it's just a spike because there's a government FOMO, or what is happening really with gold right now?
Yeah, I think just to tie up that Solana, because I'm not like a huge nerd on crypto. I'll tell you one reason I like Solana is a year or two ago I read the book by Michael Lewis, which documented the life and times of Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah.
And within that book, it talks about Sam Bankman-Fried being hugely bullish on Solana. And FTX took a huge Solana position. Like if FTX would have never been closed down and wind down, they'd be one of they'd probably be like $1 trillion market cap today.
Yeah.
And so what got me interested in Solana was just hearing that Sam Bankman-Fried, who I assume understands crypto pretty well, was big into Solana. And so that's one reason why I really like Solana. And from what I understand, and it's not a deep view, it has certain benefits above Ethereum, and people might be, but this is where you get into what I think is the difference between Bitcoin and all the others, which is these are utilitarian coins. These are not created to be stores of value.
Exactly.
There's one store of value coin, which is Bitcoin. The other ones are plays on how does this all shake out in the DeFi world. And so you have to keep that in mind. It's just the same way that copper is an industrial metal and gold is a store of value. Mm-hmm. Gold has the monetary premium, copper doesn't. And at different points in time, gold or copper's in demand, steel's in demand, aluminum's in demand, but they're industrial. Silver's partly industrial, partly monetary. But there's one pure store of value, that's gold. And I think in crypto, there's one pure store of value, and that's Bitcoin. So that's ultimately what I favor overall in the long run, because I don't have to bet on which is the better, transactional base layer. Now, going back to the end of the day, gold and what's happening, I do think that gold it's re-entering after a brief hiatus into international settlement flows. And Keynes during Bretton Woods basically said, and people know this, Triffin's dilemma, if you have a fiat or if you have an individual country's currency be the ultimate settlement mechanism, it's going to force you into massive deficits because the world's going to demand dollars. And, it's just the mechanics of how it works. And Keynes wanted to have Bancor, BANCOR, I think is how it's spelled, which was essentially kind of this quasi gold backed kind of system where, like, if a country devalued its currency too much, like it had to pay in with gold, or different things happened to kind of regulate international economies so we don't get into this massive like currency devaluation war, so on and so forth. And gold was the anchor of that. And gold acts extremely well as an anchor for these types of arrangements. And I think the BRICS countries are putting in place something that's not a gold standard where gold is fixed and, we're going to have the yuan to X amount of ounces of gold, but where gold acts as that kind of control.
Is that nominal anchor? The nominal anchor. That's
and I think that's happening. And it's going to continue. And as it does, I think it's going to drive up the value. And so that's why I'm extremely bullish gold. And I think it makes sense because it's just a good thing for it. Like gold should be like $600-700 an ounce if there wasn't a monetary premium to it, because it's less valuable than platinum. It's less rare in the Earth's crust than platinum. Rhodium. I mean, there are other precious metals that are more rare. Like gold has the price it has because it's a monetary metal, and a pure monetary metal in a sense. Almost, there's the jewelry demand, but primarily it's a monetary metal, and that's what drives Bitcoin's price. It's the exact same thing. There's no difference.
Exactly.
There's no people that want to say, well, gold is one thing and Bitcoin are the other, don't know what they're
digital
talking about.
Gold.
They're two sides of the same coin. It's about what monetary premium do central banks, market participants want to imprint upon this asset.
And that makes me think about a question that whenever I talk about Bitcoin, almost all the times they ask, so what if someone came up with the same theory of Bitcoin and created a new Bitcoin with 21 million and so on? It has already the premium, the monetary premium that gold has, despite the fact that platinum or any other mineral may have a
It's the
higher
exact
stock
same
to flow
threat.
ratio.
It's the exact
Exactly.
same threat. If
Exactly.
someone said, what if a central bank said they want to start holding palladium as reserve?
Yes,
Of course, they could do that.
they could,
Palladium
but
it's like gold. It's finite in
high stock to
supply.
flow ratio. Yeah,
But gold is like gold has that moat. It has that history. It has that,
historical mode.
and Bitcoin is building that. Yeah.
Mel, and how do we help people understand that the cap of that the future price of Bitcoin is not currently capped to the cap of what gold is 20 trillion? How do we help people do the exercise that is not the theoretical ceiling? It
The
could be
upper
much
limit.
more. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it was like a couple years ago, somebody said like Bitcoin will reach gold parity if it hits $400,000 an ounce. Now Bitcoin needs to hit like 1.2 million or something like that. So these are just going to keep going up in tandem, I think. I mean, does Bitcoin ever catch up to gold? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, but it doesn't matter to me because I think at the end of the day, they're all going to keep going up. And I think on a percentage basis, you know, Bitcoin goes up more. It closes that gap. Whether it passes it ever is kind of irrelevant. Because they're both just going to keep going up. Bitcoin's going to be 40 trillion. I mean, gold's going to be 40 trillion, then 60 trillion in market cap over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And Bitcoin's going to get probably a bigger chunk percentage of that. And maybe it passes it, maybe it doesn't. But at the end of the day, like, you know, in 10 years, like
they're gonna eat into the real estate chunk, right?
It's taking away. It's almost like the pie is just going to expand exponentially because of these lower for longer policies, which are not just going to be done by the United States. They're also going to be done by the ECB eventually and the BOJ. There's a BOJ meeting coming up later this week, and initially people thought they might hike. Now they're not going. These whole goals of like we're going to hike and keep interest, like these governments just can't do it. There's too much sovereign debt. Like they're backed into a corner. They can't do it. They can't have 5%. It literally will collapse the system. They collapse the system. Stock markets collapse. Tax receipts collapse. There's a recession. Then transfer payments shoot up. Like you have to keep this Ponzi going. It's Bernie Madoff with the printing press in the basement. I mean, would Bernie Madoff have gone down if he had a printing press in the basement? No, he would have kept printing, and that's what these governments around the world are going to do. And I don't know, in the next month, okay, look, could we have in the next few weeks, who knows what happens geopolitically? Could Israel restart a war with Iran? Things get dicey. People want to dial back risk. I mean, we're going to have volatility. We're going to have bumps in the road. I'm not saying it's every day we're going up 25 points on the S&P. We're going to have drawdowns. But over the long arc, and you don't even have to be that long. I think if you're like 6-12 months at least looking out, the path is up and to the right.
I think we agree on that, right?
We're fully synced. Yeah, that's why I always follow Mel and watch every single podcast he goes or shows. Mel, tell us a little bit about your book, Quas. What is it about?
Yes.
And then we'll share it on the link so people buy it and read it.
Because
tell us a little bit.
If you mix history, finance, and the capacity to do a novel or a fiction work, that I think that's amazing.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I studied a little creative writing in college. I always was someone who thought about writing. And after all my years in finance, I love thriller novels. So I love like Tom Clancy or Jack Carr, different things. I mean, kind of cheesy, just let your mind release. Like, give me a break from all the heavy reading. Like,
let me chew some gum. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm like, what would be cool is if we created like a thriller novel, but instead of like CIA agents, it was like corrupt central bankers or, guys at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, which is, a big player in the novel. So it's about basically a world where quantum computing has merged with AI and taken over the stock market, and it's controlling volatility and all these things. And behind the scenes, there's these central banker corrupt coalition from basically China, India, Russia, trying to essentially thwart, U.S. hegemony. I mean, and there's hedge fund managers and different things, and there's a gold revaluation in it. There's a market crash where instead of the dollar rallying and bonds rallying, they don't, and things that actually, kind of presaged, because I wrote this in basically 23. It was published early last year, but it's still relevant. It actually takes place in the future. It takes place in 2027. So it's an interesting novel. People want to read it. It's available wherever books are sold. There's not a Spanish version, unfortunately, but it's on Audible or Amazon or different place. It's distributed by Simon & Schuster, a large publisher, so it should be available wherever books are.
We'll link it in the description. I'm definitely going to read it. Andres, do you have a last question to Mel? So
no, my last question was about that novel and how, because I also wrote a novel, but a historical novel. I love Roman history, because I think that economic cycles repeat all the time. And I like to understand Rome because I think it's the foundation of everything: politics, the legal system, macro, inflation, and so on and so forth. So,
the Catholic Church, in a way.
The Catholic, exactly.
And I'm Catholic. I mean, it's the Pope is in Rome for a reason, right?
Exactly, and the armies, how so many things. And I, at some point in my life, I wrote a novel about this guy, historical Germanicus, and what happened around. And I think that history thinking, non-fiction, fiction helps you or gives you a mindset that lets you see 360 degrees around, and capitalize those things on financial markets. So I just wanted to ask that: do you think that gives you an advantage? Having this the capacity to read novels, learn history, research finance, and all those things?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately,
It's like a holistic,
it's a big story, right? And you wrote a novel, so you there's all kinds of things that are involved. There's a main thread, but there's all these side threads.
You need consistency. You need to have everything. Like, the plot has to fit.
The plot has to fit. And sometimes the world is a lot stranger than fiction, and it goes in places that people don't imagine, but there tends to be a narrative to it. And I think you're absolutely right. Of a lot of it does tie back to Rome, and a lot of, the way that Western culture developed. And Rome, you can then even, trace back to different ties to ancient Samaria or ancient Egypt. And you look at that, and it gets passed into Rome, and Rome institutionalizes it around Europe. And when the Roman Empire falls, essentially it gets replaced by essentially a Catholic replacement, where instead of an emperor, you have a pope, and then you have the bishops, and these things go out. And then you have this Western world kind of expand into the Americas, and then you have the rest of the world, which is not that heavily influenced, whether you're talking about India or China, and you're seeing some breaks and divides, right, between who was truly influenced by Rome and who wasn't, and in different things. And you can almost look at, where do the Roman tentacles reach, and that's kind of one corridor of the world right now. Where didn't they reach to? And that's another corridor of the world right now. So I think that's a very astute way to look at the world that we still live in today. And, it continues to be very important.
Fascinating.
Very, very important.
Mel, 3 last things, because I know we're running over time. And so you have the silver bars. Do you know where the dollar or the money sign comes from? So
the peso.
It was the Spanish, Hispania, and they were putting an H and an S, and that eventually became I think that's pretty cool.
That's right. I do know that. Yeah, I'm a monetary historian. You caught me off guard with that one, but I mean, because we didn't want to call things the pound. We didn't want to follow Britain. In fact, there was a vote in Congress, and it only missed by a few votes, to make German the official language of the United States, because there was such like a current in the U.S. to stay. And the peso was, because Spain had all that gold and silver, the peso, and because in those days money was gold and silver, it didn't matter who minted it. Like you didn't care if it was minted by the U.S. Mint or somebody else, if you were getting paid in gold and silver. And so the Spanish peso was a trusted coin. Like, okay, we can trust the assay value and everything. And so the peso was the dominant currency in the colonies and early United States.
Amazing. Mel, where can people find you? What's your Twitter?
Mel Mattison 1, MELMATTISON 1 on Twitter. There are some like close imposter accounts, but
we'll link it on the description. But I just wanted to, so people can hear it verbally. And the last thing is, Mel, this is Andres. This is so good. We would like to have you as a repeat guest, like, I don't know, every quarter or maybe every 6 months, because we just learn a lot. I mean, I really appreciate it.
Yes, amazing.
This was amazing. This was amazing.
Well, I really appreciate it. I had a great time. This was one of my favorite conversations.
And whenever you come to Colombia and to Medellin, let us know.
Let us know. Let us know. And Andres will take you to a soccer game in Nacional.
Yes, I'll take you to a soccer match. I love Nacional, and Hernan will take you to drink some beers.
Perfect. One of our famous lunches in we have in El Che, to eat some good steak, grass-fed. So yeah.
No, that's perfect. I walk down the hill in Calasanz to the metro and go right to Estadio, and I'll meet you guys at the stadium, and we will have a great time. I have all the Nacional stuff, the hats, jerseys, with what is it? Bombo, the bread, whatever it is.
The ponchos,
scarves. Yeah, I've got it all. I'm ready.
Amazing. Mel, thanks a million, man.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mel. It was very good.
Perfecto. Bueno. Listo.
Listo.
Listo que listo.
Listo. Listo que listo. Yeah, we're done. We're done. Mel, really, man, amazing. Where do you live currently? Are you in Florida or
North Carolina, actually?
North Carolina. Oh,
what city?
It's called Durham. It's Durham, where Duke is located. I moved back here after coming back.
Actually, North Carolina is an amazing state. It's not only beautiful. I used to go to a summer camp in North Carolina in a sort of crappy university. It's called Western Carolina University, but I had a lot of fun. And
it's beautiful out there in the mountains.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The mountains, the rich, but North Carolina is one of the most investor-friendly states in the U.S. I don't know if you knew that or not, but North Carolina is awesome.
Yeah, it's growing very fast. I mean, it's always like CNBC has these top states for business. I think it was number one this year. It's always like I mean, Apple's going to be building $1 billion building a couple miles away from where I live.
Cool.
We've got, all these big pharma companies here. Like there's a big thing here. We call it the Research Triangle Park, RTP, in the Raleigh-Durham area. Obviously, we've got huge banks headquartered in Charlotte, Bank of America. It's a
financial hub.
Yeah, it's a powerful state that people don't realize necessarily.
It's very powerful and beautiful. And the beers in Asheville are amazing too.
I have a weird story. Like back in the day, like 25 years ago, I found myself selling websites and to a company called New Tech Solutions in Charlotte, North Carolina, that was actually founded by the guy of the movie called Catch Me If You Can. And so basically they were starting to do neural networks to detect fraud. It's I like North Carolina. Mel, the alpha that you share is amazing. And amazing. Our philosophy is just we want people to make money, and so we share alpha. If you ever come to Medellin, we'll definitely invite you to our own chat. It's going to be Spanglish, but you'll see kind of like
you'll information.
Have fun. I can handle it. It will be hard.
But it's very good because
no es fácil para mí, pero cuando es necesario yo puedo hablar en español. Es difícil y como yo digo, no hablo en futuro o pasado muy bien, pero
Presente.
you can manage.
Yes, sí, I can manage. I can manage.
You can manage. And probably the best thing is that even if we speak English, because your wife has exactly the same accent as we do, then for you it's just
called
like
Paisa English.
It just flows. It just flows.
Yeah. No, it always amazes me. Like we'll be walking somewhere and she'll just hear just a little bit of Spanish. She'll be like,
yeah, she knows
Paisa. Or the Rolo, Colombia, like she'll know. So it's very distinct, and my father-in-law's is very distinct as well. He would love to meet you guys too. But he has a business down there in Medellin called Rafa Maya. His name's Rafa. He puts up those nets around carpets all over the place to keep.
Yeah, the ones in the buildings.
yeah, exactly. So no, I love it down there. She still has a lot of family. Her mom lives up here and she lives here, but her brother still lives down there. Her father, my nieces and nephews and stuff. So when we fly into Rio Negro and come in next time, we'll let you guys know.
Just please. Give us a shout out. Yeah, please, we'll do. All right, my friend. Thanks a million, man.
See you.
Okay,
bye.
And definitely let me know in 3-6 months you want to chat again.
Great.
We'll publish the podcast next Thursday.
Okay, perfect. I will share it as best I can.
All right, man.
All right, have a great weekend. Bye, guys.
Ciao.